Welcome everyone as we wait for a few more people to enter our waiting room. My name is Katina Michael. I'm your program chair for the Masters of Science in Public Interest Technology in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society at Arizona State University. Firstly, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, a leading discussion on public interest technology. And many of you I know firsthand are working in this sector already or are interested in contributing in some way. I'm thankful and grateful for the time that you've committed today. You can enter and exit as you wish, but we hope we can captivate your attention for about 2 hours. This presentation in all its form will also be broadcast in a forthcoming international conference, ISTAS 20, that is an IEEE conference, the International Symposium on Technology and Society, from November 12th to the 15th. Please consider sending in abstracts or peer-reviewed papers, but the theme of this year's conference is actually public interest technology. On the next slide, please. We have an incredible lineup today. A short introduction just for me to set the scene. Then I'll hand over to our founding director, Professor Dave Guston, a foundation professor now, and also to our keynote speaker, Jumana Abu-Ghazaleh from Pivot for Humanity. On the following slide, you'll see the faculty teaching into the public interest technology degree, among whom, in no particular order, are Erik Fisher, Benedict Callan, Bob Cook-Deegan, Elisa Graffy, Mahmud Farooque, and our academic advisor that if you consider doing this new degree, you will have quite a lot of contact with. I'd now like to say a few housekeeping things. If you are not seeing the PowerPoints in the right way, you may wish to fit to screen. It's a feature in Zoom. I'd also like to say the way we'll conduct ourselves is by listening to the speaker, and then we can unmute and also chat with one another in the chat window. Please share your thoughts. Don't wait to actually hear the end of a presentation. You can continue to comment throughout, ask your questions throughout, and when it's Q&A time, I'll moderate that with the actual speaker. But what we're looking for is insight from you, ideas, and how we can together build a wonderful ongoing program. This webinar series will happen every 2 weeks in the academic calendar year, and will bring together some of the leading voices in public interest technology. And so feel free to raise your hand at question time, unmute, and actually let us see your video if you so wish, or otherwise continue to comment if you're in a scenario where you can't actually speak or be viewed. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, and I pass on to my director, David Guston.
Katina, thank you so much, and I'm incredibly pleased and proud to be part of this and the launch of the new Master of Science degree, and to have everybody here beginning these conversations about PIT. I want to start off just by saying what a great place ASU in general and the School for the Future of Innovation and Society in particular are to think about this topic of public interest technology. As just about everybody knows, particularly if you're at ASU or you're local to Tempe, or if you pay attention to the world of higher education, Arizona State University is ranked #1 for innovation in the country. What does that mean? That means that the university, drawing on a self-conception of itself as a new American university, as a university that takes fundamental responsibility for the success and well-being of the community that it's in, is one that is constantly trying to innovate, very much like the private sector innovators around us. A lot of people at ASU, from the very top, President Michael Crow, down through the leadership and the students at the university as well, believe that every day is day one for innovation. We're always constantly challenging ourselves to think about what might be done differently, what might be done to solve or address some of the challenges in the world through making change, and how it is that we at ASU, through the programs that we run, through the capacities that we bring, can help people along through that change. ASU is also incredibly highly regarded in particular areas of creating change in the world. For example, the university was recently ranked 5th globally in pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations had set out, and 5th globally and 1st nationally. So these are two really prominent external validators of what it is that ASU has to bring to the table in terms of research, in terms of learning, and in terms of service to the community around topics relevant to Pitt. ASU is also an inaugural member of a group nationwide, the Public Interest Technology University Network, that is being led by the Ford Foundation, by New America, excuse me, and a number of other foundations that are trying to make an academic and professional field of public interest technology. And you might have heard of other kind of cognate terms. It could be tech for good, it could be responsible innovation, it could be human tech. There are a whole host of different kinds of visions of what this topic is, but these organizations have come together to create a field around public interest technology, and ASU is a charter member and a prominent member of those fields. The School for the Future of Innovation and Society within ASU is also a great place to do this work, because the faculty that you see here and presenting blend incredible scholarship in public interest technology and its cognate areas, great practical experience around public interest technology in those cognate areas, and an incredible passion for doing this kind of work with students and with the community. I don't have a lot of time on the agenda, and I know that there is a host of other folks who are scheduled to present, and I see Katina sort of nodding and smiling at me. So I will mute myself after that introduction and look forward to other folks' remarks and any questions that people might have of me in particular.
Thank you so much, Dave, for being the impetus. I think if it wasn't for you, this degree would not have been so utterly supported from the grassroots up, and we're all privileged that you were basically leading the way for us to get this going. So thank you for all that support over the last 2 years. I also wanted to mention Professor Erik Johnson, who's on the call. He's on sabbatical, but has graciously joined us. He's also a faculty teaching fellow into the Pitt degree, among many other hats at ASU. We were to have someone from the New America Foundation be present with us. We thank them for their contribution to Pitt. Again, without them and the strong Pitt UN network that Dave was mentioning, we would not be at this point that we are, where we are talking to industry about how to incorporate Pitt degrees and Pitt flavors into the workforce, both large and small business. So what we have is actually what I would say someone in practice in Jumana Abu-Ghazaleh of Pivot for Humanity. I mean, I was struck by the name the first time I saw it, but she's Pitt through and through. Whenever I conceive of Pitt, I actually don't think of the mega big large corporations, although my deepest hope is that we can embed Pitt scholars into those areas. But I want to hand off to Jumana to tell us about her endeavor in Pivot for Humanity. Thank you, Jumana.
Thank you, Katina, for having me. I'm so honored and privileged to be here, and so excited to witness this day one of innovation, which is, a lot to look forward to. I think, this gives me hope, because we're creating future leaders. You are creating future leaders, and the world needs them. We need them. I need them. And the way I think of public interest technology is that it's not really a subset of technology. It's not do-gooder technology. It's not, as you said, Dave, there are plenty of different names for it, but it doesn't, it's not a small thing. It's not mission-driven. It's not cause-driven. It's not, social justice warrior technology. Public interest technology, as I see it, as Pivot for Humanity sees it, is technology that works for the public, period. End of story. And who is this public? This public is you, it's me, it's your neighbors, classmates, parents, cousins, it's family, it's people who live on different continents, it's the children of migrant workers, it's our favorite teacher, it's our childhood best friend. Technology's reach is vast, very vast. We know this. We build for scalability. The more people use a piece of software, the more successful it is deemed, and the more people, the more people use it, the more frequently they use it, the higher the valuation. That's just the context we live in. So instead of building exclusively for narrow business goal-driven personas, we ought to consider how other untargeted audiences might use our products, with the unintended consequences that this might generate, because they will. And the consequences we have all seen have been dire, no matter how unintended they are. We ought to start building for the public. So what if we built Pivot for Humanity? One of our questions is, well, what if we built software as though we knew for a fact that someone we love, someone we care about deeply, someone we would never want to hurt would be using it? Someone real to us. Think of a child or a parent or a grandparent, perhaps. What might we have done differently? Would we be on the verge of what some researchers consider a tech-fueled mental health crisis among teenagers? Would Facebook be experimenting, as they do, with making sadness and depression contagious among their users? Is that the kind of technology we would be creating if we assumed for a fact people we really care about would be using it? And what about the flip side? What if we built software with the assumption that it would be used by someone with terrible intentions, someone we feared? YouTube's recommendation engine, recommendation algorithm has fueled the spread of neo-Nazi adjacent content for years. It would be really hard to imagine that being the case if we built around the worst case use scenario. So what about this instead of how we build today? What about public interest technology that considers that what if the person we love, we most love, the person we most love and the person we most fear were using the same tool at the same time? That's how we build public interest technology, in our view. We build it by planning for that technology to be used both by our favorite person and our worst enemy. Public interest technology is an acknowledgement, I think, and a celebration of the fact that our tech tools hold immense social, political, economic, and health consequences for billions. And it's also a demand that technologists, all technologists, take that opportunity and responsibility very, very, very seriously. The end user, we think at Pivot for Humanity, is not just an end user. We can hurt the end user. And the end user, importantly, can hurt us. Humanity, all of humanity, is the end user. A couple of years ago, I founded Pivot for Humanity with the goal of encouraging and supporting a new breed of technologists that understand the context in which their creations will be deployed, who care about the consequences of these technologies, and who demand the right to profit without having to leave their conscience at the door. The next generation of iconic technologists, that is to say the people in this room, who are going to be attending this program, will show the world that the best technology, the most successful technology, the most admired technology, and yes, some of the most profitable technology is technology that serves the public and serves it well. Thank you for having me.
I'm so moved, Jumana, that your talk encapsulates what we feel in this program, but you said it so eloquently that I don't think I could even do it justice to try and summarize.
You're very kind. I'm very inspired by all the work that you're doing.
I'm very, very touched. I know the team is here. I know the students are. And while I've made a fundamental error in not allowing Q&A for you, what I would like is for people to ask Jumana in the chat window questions and for her to be able to send contact details out via that chat as we go on after this wonderful keynote that has set the scene. Thank you for all you're doing at Pivot for Humanity. It gives me so much hope, Jumana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Erik Fisher, who will be talking about a pet interest of his, and I won't steal his thunder. Over to you.
Thanks, Kat. Let's see, I've got some slides, so I'll try to share my screen. And maybe I can make them large. So I agree with what Kat just said about Jumana's talk. Thank you very much. Very inspiring, very crisp, forward-looking. You know, on some level, I think my, you know, rather more formal and scholarly work that's about to come at you is just trying to build a foundation to support the things you're doing already. So I welcome yours and everyone's comments and critiques, because this is really just something that I think is the beginning in terms of building a framework. I've titled this short talk, Principles of Public Interest Technology, Learning from Responsible Innovation. As Dave mentioned, responsible innovation is one of the cognate areas for Pitt, and it's one that has probably received the most attention, policy, scaffolding and infrastructure, as well as conceptual development. And even though I won't go into it specifically, a lot of what I've got is drawing from that. So I wanted to just start off with two statements. I'm not going to read them all. You can just look at the highlighted text. These are just, you know, two statements about public interest technology, and I think they get at two sides of the same coin. One is to develop better outcomes through technology for the public, and to deliver those. The other one, though, is what I call rationale two, and that is attending to the failures and looking at all the ways in which technologists and technology have risked undermining the public's trust and the very ties that bind us together. And so that sort of gets into this idea of unintended consequences. So, you know, just to kind of start off and frame things, I think we can say that public interest technology consists both of technology, but also of what, I love this phrase, civic-minded technologists who design, develop, disseminate, and regulate that technology. And I think it's important to say that we want to build, not just at ASU, but I think throughout the entire Pitt network, a broad understanding of who is a civic-minded technologist. It doesn't necessarily have to be people who have engineering degrees. Okay, we can have liberal artists and humanists and social scientists that also fit this, this role. But we basically, you know, I'm going to present three rationales and then sort of unpack some potential process principles. The first one is pretty obvious, that because we know technology can and does advance interests, why not develop and apply technology in ways that advance the public interest? However, we have to very quickly follow that up and acknowledge that technology, like law, can constrain and can limit and can take away freedoms and can produce winners and losers. And it doesn't necessarily always do that by design. It can do that sort of accidentally and with systemic effects because of other technologies and other systems that it's embedded in. So therefore, we want to develop and apply technology in ways that do not undermine the public interest. And if we just stopped here, it might seem like a simple story, you know, that resembles some of the bioethics principles we've all seen, such as beneficence, do good, and non-maleficence, don't do bad, right? Do no harm. But I think that would give us a terribly limited sense of all the challenges and complexities that's involved. And so I've just listed a few pitfalls and caveats, as I'm calling them. I think most of us are familiar with these, but I think the world is not. I'm not going to go into all of them, but you know, just I'll pick out three. The fallacy of technological determinism, the idea that if we design technology to work in a certain way, it will work in that way, and that when we have outcomes and impacts from technology, that's due to the technology impacting society, as opposed to society reconfiguring itself and reorganizing itself, and often reshaping the technology. The fallacy of technological neutrality says, well, technology is really just a tool and we want to use it for good. So we're going to think about the target, the goal, and just try to hit the target. And, you know, if it doesn't work out, maybe we have to change the regulatory system or something. when in fact, technology, the very design and development and deployment and use of technology is infused with values, assumptions, commitments, and these are sometimes latent, sometimes explicit, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. And this really gets at the heart of the challenge for the PIT practitioner, and that is how to deal with the fact that as soon as you put two bits together, a nut and a bolt together, and you're envisioning this for a societal context, potentially it's going to have normative valence. And then, maybe one more idea of conflicts of interest, and that is, if we develop a technology for the public interest, but we're really focused on promoting that technology, there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that our priorities might actually be different from how we think of them. Right? And so if I am fundamentally advancing a certain technology that happens to, I believe, work in the public interest, it behooves me to say, number one, I'm advancing this technology. Number two, I hope it works in the public interest, as opposed to, for instance, filling up NGOs with a certain type of hardware or software that's actually not going to serve them as well as something else. This is a very serious, I think, caveat to take into mind, because most people who work in the tech industry don't have the luxury of pivoting and saying, oh, I'll just use a different technology, or I'll shift from high tech to appropriate tech. So I think we want to build a space for people whose number one goal might be wealth creation or career advancement or technological promotion, but who seriously want to serve the public, and so that they can be clear to themselves and to others and be more effective. So given these various pitfalls and caveats, I think it's also important to realize that we have to see the technology development process, which we can include use and dissemination and regulation, as well as the public interest articulation process, as two processes that have their own integrity. They're both dynamic, and they are both subject to complexities, and that somehow the goal is to align them. So we really want to make sure that the process, the dynamic process of technology aligns, I've misspelled align, aligns with the complex and underdetermined notion of the public interest. So this notion of alignment sort of is really what I think might help PIT distinguish itself from more simplistic notions of what's going on here. So let me present one vision of how this alignment would work. If we, again, see technology development as a dynamic process and public interest articulation as itself a process that, may or may not extend and last as long as the development of a particular technology, but it certainly is something that happens in time in an iterative manner and involves all sorts of complexities. So over time, if we can imagine these things braiding together in what I like to think of as the public interest technology braid, so that the two processes can really be aligned with one another, so that we can get the desired outcomes, whatever they may be. I've just listed a few here, but we can focus on sustainability, we can focus on accessibility. The point is, it's a very broad set of desiderata that PIT aims to produce, okay? But of course, we have challenges to articulating the public interest. One is that we live in a world in the US that organizes and distributes power through pluralism. And the technology development and use process just cannot accommodate a truly pluralistic environment. This also leads to another challenge, which is legitimacy. And that gets to the notion of how publics perceive technology, those who develop it, and the processes and the organizations and the institutions behind it. And finally, a major challenge to public interest articulation has to do with trade-offs, since there are numerous values and objectives and goals that can go into the public interest, and oftentimes they're not in harmonious relationship with one another. So this brings up different philosophies and schools of thought, some of which say you always have to trade off, some of which say you can satisfy and integrate. I'm not going to get into that, but just simply to point to the challenge. And of course, we have tremendous challenges with technology development and dissemination and use. Technology develops in a complex environment. There are other interacting suites of technology that it will, be interdependent with. And there are base technologies that any technology is built upon. There are economic environments in which technologies are disseminated. There's, uncertainty is absolutely, a problem that essentially gets worse because of the complexity and because of the nature of how decisions during the development cycle and during the use cycle tend to ramify and build upon one another. And because of the deep, complex, and uncertain notion of society itself and the context of use, we really can't predict positive or negative effects with any certainty. And then technology is what I like to call multivalent, as opposed to ambivalent. It has multiple valences, multiple normative valences. The same technology can mean different things to different people. Technology is often described as a double-edged sword. And individuals and groups throughout society tend to sort of have a love-hate relationship with technology. On the one hand, depending upon it and getting very excited about its promises, and the other hand, feeling alienated and distanced from those who develop it and the principles that determine its use. So, this means that we're constantly in the technology development process creating the conditions for unintended consequences. And in the process of creating these conditions, we may not even be aware that we're doing that. And some of these unintended consequences are undesirable, and some of them are even what are called revenge effects. So if we're actually trying to advance the public interest and we end up harming it or undermining it. And I think we just have to be honest with ourselves that these are the conditions under which PIT advances. And so we need to make sure that it's sophisticated and theoretically grounded in its response. So let's see. What I suggest is that more important than, or equally important, but I'm going to say more important than the evaluative criteria that we might want to use to assess whether a particular PIT product or service or system was successful or not. That's certainly very important. And so separate from evaluative criteria or process criteria, these are also separate from planning criteria. The goals that we're trying to hit. All three types of these criteria are important, but I think the devil's in the details, and to actually have a dynamic understanding of what happens between authorizing a PIT project and assessing how successful it was, that's really the stuff of what's interesting. So some meta process criteria that we might want to consider, and I'd be interested in knowing what others would add to this, are, it should be integrative. It should understand that we're dealing with different processes and they don't necessarily speak the same language. There should be an ongoing attentiveness to their integration, and the process by which we integrate them should be robust. It shouldn't just simply be a flow chart that comes out of one tool or somebody's idea of how to integrate, right? It should be something that's reliable and proven. Okay, and so we can be a little more specific and say, what are these process criteria? Well, I think clearly when we are articulating the public interest, we want to do so with an awareness that there are multiple views involved, multiple interests, multiple goals and values. So I think we want to have an inclusive process. And technology development really needs to start in the beginning and throughout its process by being anticipatory. So thinking about what could go wrong and either being prepared to respond to that at the time or responding to it as soon as these are identified, these unintended consequences. Reflexivity is an interesting concept. It basically has to do with recognizing your own values and those of others, and how your own values might be a bias in how you see other people's values. So being aware and accountable about your own values when you articulate what you think is good for the public. Technology development actors need to be vigilant. They need to be constantly attentive to the potential for their choices and decisions and actions and designs to impact the public interest. Public interest articulation needs to be context sensitive. There might be two different groups, but they live in different environments and they might be using the same technology. But because of that, the public interest might require different design or different articulation. I think technology development needs to be flexible to accommodate new ideas and insights and challenges, and possibly to pivot or to reinvent itself or to adapt as it's moving forward. And I think finally, although technology itself, especially in the private sphere, doesn't have the luxury, we could say, in a capitalistic environment to be transparent all the time, right? This has to do with competition and intellectual property laws. The articulation of the public interest can be transparent, and I think it should be. And then finally, as I already mentioned, maybe the key to this entire thing is the adaptability of the technology development process and the people who are involved in it, so that there truly can be an iterative and integrative process. So that's what I've got. I'm happy to take questions and learn from everybody here in terms of how they see the PIT principles.
So if you'd like to raise your hand or just unmute and ask a question to Erik, please feel free to do so. We've got about 4 minutes before we move on to the next speaker. Feel free to write comments in the chat window as well, or questions if you can't speak. I'm going to go to a question for Jumana. Jumana, if you can speak. We have a question from Andy Mastrosavas. She says, Jumana, how can tech workers get involved in professionalizing the industry?
Can you hear me? Let me put my
Yes,
video back on.
yes.
Terrific. I love this question. Thank you for that. I am sorry, I'm not paying attention to the chat as I was paying attention to the speaker, but our view is professionalization is actually the way to empower, is put power in the hands of technologists so that they can work in accordance with their values. So how does it work? Historically, the precedents we have from law, from engineering, from medicine, essentially professionalization breaks down into four, you could call them phases or stages, but it's basically four things. One is a social contract with humanity, right? So why do we exist? What is our role? Right now, the only North Star for the industry is to make money. And if that's the case, then there's not going to be any technology for the public interest unless there is another North Star. And that North Star needs to unify technologists across the board. So it's a leveling of the playing field. So it's a way to set norms and values that are shared across a group of people, just like they are with doctors or engineers. It's an understanding that everybody has to play by the same rules, and it allows people to say, no, we're not going to do this because that's not the social contract we have with society. So that's one, is unify the industry with a social contract with humanity. Two, once you know what that social contract is, define its terms. What is okay and what's not okay within that social contract. So what are the standards? How do you establish the universal standards that are going to guide the behaviors and for practitioners? The third is, once you know what those standards are, how do you prepare? And this is what I think is amazing about PIT and what you all are doing here. How do you prepare technologists to live up to the standards, to deliver against them? What kind of training do they need? What kind of education do they need? What shape does it take? And so you have a social contract that has very clear universal standards. You have a clear understanding of what it takes to become one, to become a practitioner. And the fourth and really important thing is enforcement, right? So what happens? What are the consequences if you fail to live up to those standards if you don't operate. And one of the reasons why we think this is actually a really powerful tool for a powerful way for technologists to reclaim their trade, essentially, away from the CEOs or the venture capitalists, is because it allows technologists to set their to set their own norms and standards and push back and say, no, we're not ready to do this. No, we're not going to release it too soon or anything like that. So that's how you go about it. As a technologist, if you want to professionalize, if you're a tech worker and you want to professionalize, I think what you all are providing is exactly the first step, is the thinking around what is required to be a responsible innovator, to be able to create and to make magic and to change the world without losing sight of the damage that you can cause. And those are the topics that you're exploring and the frameworks that you're building. That's exactly what we need. It's interesting because a lot of the technology space has been built around this idea that education is for academics. You don't need it for technology. You don't need to learn. You can learn it on your own. If you can code, you can teach yourself to code, then you can do anything. And I think that we're suffering the consequences of that mindset. We are seeing that if you don't have an understanding of the world and how things relate to one another, if you don't have an understanding of why philosophy matters or psychology matters or art matters, or how all of those things feed into what it means to be alive, and if you create technology in a vacuum, we are doomed. And so I think that the epicenter of the next generation, the next wave of technologies is academic. It's all in the learning environment.
Andy, do you have a response to Jumana? If you wanted to unmute, you're welcome.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate that. It's interesting to hear that perspective, and to think about how I can sort of fuse my sort of academic interests with my sort of industry.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you, Jumana. Dr. Roba Abbas actually communicated with me saying you answered a lot of her question as well. Dr. Abbas, of course, the program chair of the IEEE ISTAS 20 event in November from Australia. Erik, I wanted to give you an opportunity while people are still thinking about your talk. I mean, there was so much there in that 10 minutes. To share with us, I love that diagram where you showed the technology development and then you showed PIT and this thread that has to happen. And how do you think that's going to happen?
Well, let me see if I'm okay. Yeah, it's a great question. If I had more time, I'd go into some of the precedents and case studies and tools that we've developed over the years that really populated this notion of responsible innovation. I think we're going to hear about some of them today, in terms of getting publics involved. But in my case, as Kat knows, I've developed something called STIR, which is designed to integrate societal considerations into the research and technology and innovation processes. And so it very much takes an iterative approach, and it proceeds in an ongoing manner, in sort of a regular manner. And I didn't sort of get into some of the other pitfalls, which are that when we ask technologists to think about the public and public interests, as Jumana says, they get worried that they're going to lose their North Star. This is going to slow them down, open them up to competition, make them soft, whatever the case may be. And so my work has very much been a process of convincing myself first and others second that it's possible. If I drop down or send my students into a company, into a startup, into a university laboratory, and ask certain questions that, as Jumana was saying, currently we're not allowed to ask them in education. I mean, we've actually had, PhDs, in physics that run massive laboratories say, Erik, you make us think about questions we're not supposed to think about. And so in a way, the question is, for me, if we ask these questions in an iterative, ongoing, and embedded manner, what happens? Do we slow things down? Is this sort of a break from the technology? We put it on the side and we go have a beer and talk about a movie? Or is this something that can actually be integrated into, in a synergistic manner, into the very process? And if it can be, if it's possible, is it useful? Does it produce results that the scientists and technologists are going to embrace and endorse and run with, and that responsible innovation and PIT practitioners can also say, okay, we're having an ameliorative effect here. We're actually helping things get better. So, the short answer is that we've developed a handful of tools and practices, and we've piloted them. In my case, STIR has been piloted, in hundreds of organizations over the past 10 years. And there are other approaches like constructive technology assessment and public participation and whatnot that I think they all complement one another. So I guess the challenge is really not so much that we need to reinvent the wheel, but to get the word out and to make these tools and approaches more accessible.
Erik, thank you for that response. There's a question from Susan Barrett as well. She says, would you please explain how you work with developers, technologists to improve their code or deliverables? Would you describe your process? And I think you went into that with the STIR description, but is there something you might want to add there?
Yeah, well, I guess I would add that unfortunately, I sort of have learned from decades of failed experiences that I read about. And one of the failures in trying to do this work is to just focus on inputs and not outputs. And so if you ask any ethicist, how do you make an ethical decision? They'll say, well, the first thing you do, and there's usually some ideal framework where everybody comes around the table and agrees on what the values are. And this is just not going to happen. Even in highly dynamic, successful engineering teams, it's not like everybody sets in at the beginning and says, we all joined engineering because of this, and we all really want to see the following 3 things out of this project. It's not a consensual, formal, discursive process at all. And so I think we have to be very, we have to learn from the sort of, the slow thinking, theoretical stuff that I was just presenting. That's sort of a background that tells us maybe what the process criteria are, but then we have to jump in and get our hands dirty and experiment and learn. So in STIR, we have 4 main questions that we iterate upon, and these questions actually lead to the technologists mapping out their context in the moment. What do they need to think about? Who do they need to respond to? What are they hoping to get out of this? What are the different alternatives that they're considering? What are they worried about? And we just sort of ask them to articulate things that they're thinking about anyway. And so in a way, you could say that a successful process has a very small footprint. It's not very invasive. It doesn't cost the user very much. And yet it somehow is able to deliver magic. It is transformative. And, so I think, I don't know if that helps understand how the process works. I'm being kind of general here because just in the interest of limited time.
Jumana, over to you for a moment.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think that there's it's a great question. And I think it's also telling that all of us tend to go, when we think technologists, we think about developers and coders. And I think we need to step back and think about the whole snake. I mean, you got to think about the people marketing it and the people designing it and the people. So there's a whole, I really appreciate the beginning when we talked about technologists as anybody sort of involved in the development, creation, deployment, use of technology. And I think that the process and the approach will necessarily vary depending on what part of the snake you're in. So, for coders, how do they work, and how do where are the moments of intervention or pause or thought or reflection that we can introduce that makes sense given their workflow, and which is different from that of the salesperson or the UX designer. So I think that the approach is, all right, I think that we to Erik's point, the important thing is to say, how do we interject without throwing the baby out with the bathwater in a way that's sort of frictive enough friction, but not too much friction, so that it becomes part and parcel of the work. So I think that isn't one universal way you could do. I think the universal thing is to say we need to inject moments of reflection throughout the creation and development process. I don't know if that helps, but
sure does.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan Barrett, for spurring on that question. Keep those questions coming, and feel free at question time to actually unmute and speak with us. We're going to move on to Robert Cook-Deegan now, who's based at our ASU DC office. Bob, are you available?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, it's over to you, my friend.
So I thought the most useful thing that I would do is talk about the function that is the focus of the course that I'm going to be teaching, which is called technology assessment. And technology assessment is it's not really a discipline, it's not really a method, it's not really a field, it's a function. And the idea of technology assessment was emerged from many streams about 6 decades ago. And folks began to notice, when we create these new technologies, they affect not only the people who created them, but they affect the rest of the world. And maybe we should think about what happens in the world when we introduce a new technology and think about the consequences. And that bred an interest in informing people who made policy decisions in particular. So think of members of Congress. Who in the 1970s were confronted with all this stuff that was happening in biotechnology and computing and transportation, and we had just landed on the moon, and all these new technologies are being created, and at the same time we're realizing, oh my gosh, look what happened when we built cars. We shifted from coal and solid fuels to liquid fuels, and look what that did. We paved our roads. We changed where people live by allowing them to easily move to the suburbs. Gosh, these are huge things that happen as a consequence of a new technology. Maybe we should think about the policy decisions that are associated with the introduction of a new technology and try to anticipate the problems that are going to emerge and the opportunities that are going to emerge, and think about how we make pass laws that will accommodate these new technologies. So the field of technology assessment came out as a place that I worked when I first came to Washington, D.C. in the early 1980s, was a place that was created by Congress in 1972 and began to operate in the 1970s. And its name was the Office of Technology Assessment. And Elizabeth Graffy, who you'll hear from next, and I both worked there. And its function was basically to take information about science, technology, engineering, medicine, whiz-bang high-tech stuff that's happening in the world, but all the folks who, were elected to Congress, most of whom have law degrees and hated science when they were undergraduates, kind of afraid of math, and yet almost every policy decision that they make has some sort of interaction with science, technology, medicine, engineering, and fields that they're uncomfortable with. So the place that we work, the Office of Technology Assessment, was created in order to help them think about the technologies that were coming down the rails so that they could be prepared to make policy decisions to deal with that. So if you think about it, that means that technology assessment, you need to know what the technology is, you need to know the science behind it, you need to know the business decisions that are driving it, you need to know the legal environment into which it inserts itself, and you need to know the politics, because after all, the audience that you're writing this work for, or that you're doing this analysis for, is a bunch of people who are elected to pass laws and decide what the federal budget's going to be every year. So they don't have a lot of science and technology expertise, but they need to know enough to know how it relates to the decisions that are going to be made. And that means that if you're doing technology assessment, you need to do a really good job of understanding technology, but you also need to match that to why should a policymaker care about that? And what are they going to have to do about it? What kind of laws are going to be affected by this new technology? So just to give you some examples, because that sounds pretty abstract, some examples. I come out, I'm a molecular biologist. I trained in the inherited form of Alzheimer's disease and the molecular genetics of cancer. And I come to Washington, D.C. in the early 1980s and work at this place, OTA, on Capitol Hill, right off of Capitol Hill, dealing with Congress. And what are the technologies that might be emerging from the fields that I knew something about? Well, think about it. In the 1980s, we had just discovered recombinant DNA and DNA sequencing. And the ideas of, oh my gosh, this is really, really powerful stuff, and we're learning how to manipulate DNA, which means we can change organisms, which means, oh my gosh, we've got this whole new field called biotechnology that's emerging from science, but it's very practical because it's about building drugs and new devices and things that affect people's bodies. And guess what? Those drugs and devices are pretty expensive. And who pays for those? Well, the biggest payer for those health goods and services, we spend a $1.3 trillion a year through Medicare, Medicaid, and all sorts of other federal programs that buy the things that are coming out of the innovation process in biomedicine. So the federal government, the US federal government, is the largest purchaser of those services. So guess what? If you're in charge of running the Medicare program, you're going to see a whole succession of new technologies coming at you. They're going to be expensive, and you have to decide, what are we going to pay for? How are we going to decide whether it's worth paying for or not paying for? So that was one strain of technology assessment that became very practical. And but health is just one area. I already gave the example of transportation. Elizabeth will talk about a whole different aspect of technology assessment. But what we'll be doing in the course that that Elizabeth and I will be teaching is trying to bring a focus on collective problem solving, of being really good at understanding the technology, but also being really good at understanding the audience that's trying to understand that technology and the nature of the decisions that need to be made about it, which means inherently that it has to be interdisciplinary, and it's focused on a problem. It's not focused on a discipline. And so we'll be, the framework for the course will be talking to people who go through this in their real lives. For example, in the fall, Marcia McNutt, who's now the president of the National Academy of Sciences, was the head of the U.S. Geological Service at the time when the Deepwater Horizon well blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. And she learned a lot about what do we need to know about a technology when we have to make an emergency decision. Another set of speakers will be the former FDA Commissioner Peggy Hamburg and David Relman, who are doing real-time advice right now to the federal government about how to manage the pandemic for the National Academy of Sciences. So we're going to try to get people who are making real-world decisions, advising real-world policymakers about how they're making those decisions and what is it that they use and what is most useful to them in communicating with policymakers about the decisions that they face. I'll stop there and open it up to questions, if that makes sense, Katina.
I'm always enthralled by all of you, but Bob, I've got to say, I think you're one of my favorites. That just blows my mind. And I had a couple of questions here without hogging the floor. The first one I said is, would you say what you study through technology assessment related problems or issues are wicked problems?
Yeah, so to give you an example, I did multiple things when I was in Washington, D.C. before I became an academic 2 decades ago. But I'll give you 2 examples. In the mid-1980s, there was this thing that was happening in the world as people realized there were a lot of people whose brains were beginning to fail. And we called it senile dementia in those days. But in the 1970s, we started calling it Alzheimer's disease. And suddenly we realized that there are 5 million people, Americans, tens of millions of people all over the planet who have this disease called Alzheimer's disease. It became a social movement. And the question is, well, what are we going to do about it? And if you think about it, Congress was only dimly becoming aware of this in the 1980s because there was a nascent movement. And they turned to the Office of Technology Assessment and said, hey, what should we do about Alzheimer's disease? So you collect the data about who needs to be trained to deal with it? What do we know about the science? What are the prospects for diagnosis and treatment? And how would you design a research program that would address the problem of there are going to be tens of millions of people with Alzheimer's disease because of the aging of the population? So that's one example. Another example is as we were finishing that project, the idea of mapping and sequencing the human genome came along. And this is the mid-1980s, because DNA sequencing and recombinant DNA, these miraculous technologies, came on the horizon. And the idea was, well, you know what? We need a reference genome of the whole human species to help us as a research tool to understand human biology. But it's going to cost billions of dollars. Should we do it? So Congress turned to the Office of Technology Assessment and said, hey, should there be a human genome project? And if so, who should run it? That's actually how I first met Dave Guston, because he was an undergraduate. He came to work with us on an internship before he went to graduate school and became a superpower in science and technology studies. So those are two examples of that. Think of any technology that relates to medicine, to healthcare, and you should find that there is a technology assessment being done to decide, is it worth paying for this thing? What's the consequences going to be? And who should be paying for it under what conditions and things like that?
Thank you, Bob. We've got another question by Martha Adizaga, who says, Robert, how do you integrate Indigenous or non-expert knowledge in the assessment process?
So let me give you an example. The thing that I study most intensively right now is the inherited forms of cancer. These are, cancer is caused by many things, but the thing that is constant about cancer is that there are DNA changes that are inherited by the cells that are affected by cancer. So in a sense, it's a genetic disease, but it's not necessarily inherited. It's transmitted from cell to cell, not necessarily mom and dad to kid. But I have for a long time been studying the inherited form where it is inherited. The risk of cancer is inherited. One of the things that we're encountering is the fact that almost all of the knowledge base that we have about human genetics has been acquired among Caucasian populations in Europe and North America. And all sorts of groups have been left out of that. And what that means is when you find a new variant that's that might be associated with cancer in a population that you don't have the data on, you don't know how to interpret it. So if you're from an indigenous population, you are much likely to get a result from a genetic test about inherited risk of cancer that says we don't know how to interpret this result. So as a matter of trying to do the very mundane task of understanding inherited risk of cancer so that people can have a good diagnostic test, what we need to do is invite the groups that have been left out of the infrastructure and out of the medical studies and bring them in so that they can answer the questions that they have about their inherited risk of cancer. How can we do that? The only way to do that is to engage those communities wholeheartedly, and they need to trust the system. And for very good reason, they don't. So we're trying to figure out, how do we solve this problem? And it's not it is a technical problem, but it's not primarily a technical problem. It's primarily a problem of trust and engagement. And you'll be hearing from Mahmud and Elizabeth and other folks who do this for a living, trying to figure out, how do we create an environment where the science, technology, and medical aspects of our culture can be trusted by everybody. That's probably too long of an answer, but that gets us started.
Brilliant answer. It's absolutely brilliant. It's almost the reverse of the bias that happens in the algorithms, because the data sets that are being searched are of a particular field, and this is the opposite problem. We need data. We have another follow-up question from Andy Mastrosavas. Bob, should VC-backed companies be undertaking tech assessments, and how would enforcement occur?
Yeah, so technology assessment is all over the place. So yes, private companies do have a stake, but they also have a spin on it. They have a particular reason to do it usually. So it's a different kind of technology assessment. In the private sector, it's usually, how can we talk people into paying for this thing that we're going to produce? And that's valuable. It's valuable for industry, and it's good to think about it. And there's a lot of that that goes on, particularly in the health field. But it doesn't answer a lot of the questions that we care about for secondary consequences. And it usually focuses on how can we get people to pay for this thing that we're producing, as opposed to how do we anticipate the consequences of adopting this new technology and thinking about that. So I hope that we are going to be able to get into both of those kinds of uses of technology assessment as we get into the course. Andy, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I think now a great segue, Bob, thank you for those comments. Over to Elisa.
Okay, let me get myself going here. Hello. Bob, I think, created expectations I can't meet. So I'm just gonna, and I wanna give a little shout out to the technologists who created Zoom, because I was grateful a couple times that I could both mute and black out my video, because there are a couple things that happened in that conversation that made me break out laughing or make others some appreciative noise. And it was very helpful that I could do that privately. I am going to share my screen now.
You know, that's very cheeky of you, Professor
Cheeky
Graffy.
of me.
Yeah. But I'm enjoying this continuous interaction. So go ahead.
Yeah, let me get back here. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to share my screen. You're going to have to walk me through that. But Katina asked me if I would talk about Pitt and global challenges, which is really a pretty interesting question. And so the approach I took here is to get kind of broad, to really talk a little bit more, and we only have a few minutes, so I'm doing it in a really coarse way, but to talk a little bit about how broad is this scope, and how to think about the sorts of issues and challenges that justifiably can be brought into the realm of Pitt. And it is in fact, really quite broad. So I want to talk about that a little bit, and then give just a little smidge of an introduction to the way one might think about the relationship of Pitt to some of the broader issues that Bob and Erik both talked about, but I'm going to give a much more dumbed down version of it at the moment. And then talk just a little bit about some of the issues that I expect are probably going to be coming up a lot in our program with the students that are likely to be the first cohort, and the kinds of things that seem to be kind of hopping right now. And then end by just talking a little bit about some of the things I'm working on, just to illustrate some aspects of some of the dynamics that we're discussing here in this conversation. So do I just share how do I do this? Do I just share my screen, or do you share it?
Yes, Elisa, you'll share your screen at the bottom. You just hover over that bar with the arrow key looking up. So you'll need just to move your cursor to the bottom.
So do you see it now?
Once you press share screen, then you toggle through to the window that's open.
Well, I did that, but I'm not really sure it's working.
Okay. So I'll just step
let me
through that again. You want to try again? Just down the bottom of the toolbar, that arrow pointing up, it's green.
I did that, and then let me go back.
And click to that's the one.
Oh, there we go. Now it's working. Okay.
Melissa.
Yeah, I made a mistake somewhere there. All right. Okay. So public interest technology and global challenges. So unfortunately, I forgot that Zoom does this. You're not going to be able to see that little graphic. All that little graphic shows is that even issues that we think of as global are never just global. So no matter what the issue is, there is always a multi-scalar there are multi-scalar dimensions to them. There are local, national, regional, and global issues, scales these issues. And I just listed out a bunch of them. We can make that list a lot longer if we did a little bit of brainstorming over a few minutes. But let me kind of just pick up on maybe some that weren't mentioned. I'll skitter around a little bit. I do a lot of work on energy. Energy is definitely a global challenge. What we do with that has multiple dimensions: social, technological, political, and geographical. Geoengineering and carbon dioxide removal, which are kind of their segue issues between energy transitions and climate change, are massively convoluted. They're very wicked problems. I want to talk about that a little bit later on. We don't talk about politics and government very much as being areas where technology and public interest technology matter, but they really do. Bob sort of alluded to it, but I'll get a little bit more explicit. Governments end up collecting a lot of data. How they collect the data, the technologies by which they collect the data, the theories underlying the technologies that they use to collect data, which data, about what kinds of issues, how they store it, how they share it, how they analyze it, what kinds of metrics it turns into. I mean, these are things I did a lot when I was in government, and they're very deeply rooted in a lot of the kinds of concepts that we're talking about with Pitt. Other things like how we vote. Voting is a very, very technologically intensive activity. If there is ever a sort of a technological realm where we care about the public interest and how to define it and try to identify who the technologists are, what processes we use to regulate those things, can't think of one that's more timely than elections and voting. Biodiversity is a huge issue, both in terms of the effects of technology and sort of implications of biodiversity for the kinds of technologies that we might create. Health, disasters, where we live, the clothes we wear. I mean, think about this. We have a lot of synthetic textiles right now. They're fabulous. They're really fabulous. They're implicated in microplastics that are in the ocean, right? So there are all these you know, there's really nothing about how we live that doesn't have a technological component to it one way or another. So Pitt has no beginning, no end. The boundaries are as wide as you want to make them. And the question is what we do once we bring them into that scope. So this is my super dumbed down version of a much more complicated conversation. And Erik spoke to this a little bit, Bob spoke to this a little bit. There's a really complex ecosystem within which all technology development, science technology policy occurs. All market innovations, all coding, it all occurs in a large ecosystem that involve scientific and policy and sociocultural elements, right? I'm kind of lumping markets into that a little bit. I'm an economist and a political scientist, so I get to do that. These things all kind of come through their own threads, but they do integrate. They integrate into different frames for how we think about the problems that we're worried about, the kinds of solutions that we might consider taking with regard to them, and who's involved in all of those things. Pitt is itself a frame. So just this conception that the way we think about technology needs to be sort of re-articulated to kind of incorporate this notion of a public interest. Erik talked a lot actually, in a really helpful way about trying to articulate who's involved in those conversations, who is and is not a technologist, what are the means by which and the ideas by which they should, ought to, or can get involved in conversations together. What kinds of implications do they have for the way we actually do things? If you move to the kind of I want a pointer, which I can't really use on the screen, but if you slide over to the gear part of this little diagram, the way we frame issues has a lot to do with the way policies are developed, the way markets form, the way we think about inventions, the way culture evolves, the way the rules are designed, the kinds of social practices that we end up adopting and perpetuating. And there's, of course, a dynamic interaction between and among them, right? So, but these things are all operating sort of in the same space, and we can't really lose track of that. In our at ASU, among the faculty that are in the Pitt program, just those of us that are here on this call today, we have really different backgrounds. So I'm a social scientist with an economics and policy background. Bob told you about his background. Kat has an information technology background. Mahmud can tell you about his background, you know, when he gets on. We have everybody. We have engineers, natural scientists, physical scientists, lawyers. And we all have a slightly different perspective. Because of my own background and my career, I spent a lot of time at the science policy interface, thinking a lot about how that works and, you know, what makes it work well, what makes it work poorly, who's there, what theories apply, what practices apply, all kind of in the service of trying to figure out how you solve problems of social consequence in a way that really that works. I'm just going to put it like that. And of course, how you define works is a fairly big deal. So what are some of the issues that seem to be emerging as global challenges that Pitt might have something to do with here in the near future? And interestingly, several of them already came up in this conversation. To the far left is a picture of Deepwater Horizon that Bob talked about. I was actually working at Interior when Deepwater Horizon happened. Marcia McNutt was my director. And we all thought, everybody in government who did anything that had to do with water or energy or really anything environmental and scientific, we thought that the entire remainder of our careers were going to go into whatever happened after Deepwater Horizon. Nobody was more surprised than people in government that it kind of got resolved the way it did and that we kind of moved on from that. But we never really did move on entirely, because one of the things that happened there was technology assessment and there's risk assessment. One of the things that happened with Deepwater Horizon, which was really significant in terms of how we think about technology going forward, is that in industries like this, the risk of a disaster is typically analyzed, assessed through an economic lens, through a management lens. So let's just say you do something wrong and you have a fine. Can you afford it? Let's just say you do something wrong and you mess things up. Can you clean it up? Can you fix it? Deepwater Horizon was distinctive because there was a legal decision that labeled, that determined that the companies involved in that were grossly negligent. A determination that had never applied before under the Clean Water Act. And it meant that the fines that they faced were a lot bigger than what they were expecting and what has historically been levied in accidents. So those sorts of events actually change, they are other pivot points, they change the way people think about assessment going forward. They change the way they think about risk. They can change who gets involved in the conversations because they have to avoid this sort of an outcome, you know, in the future. Other things that are going on in this space, obviously the COVID pandemic. This is a really complicated issue for us because it was initially regarded as a health issue, and it's obviously still a health issue. But it's become really apparent that it's also an economic issue, that it's a public management issue, that it's a psychology issue, that it's a political issue, and how to develop structural approaches to that, to solve that problem that can integrate all those things. Even something as simple as testing. You can't even think about how to do testing properly unless you take all of those other elements that I just mentioned into account. Because you have to know what you're testing for, and what you're testing for and who you're testing walks you back into the kind of test you need, right? Ideally, and then it kind of in practice, who's going to administer them, who's going to report on them, what do people do after they get tested? They're like a whole string of questions that go along with that. And it turns out that we don't really have particularly good processes or mechanisms for being able to have that inclusive conversation. It's potentially the kind of thing that Pitt can create an environment for being able to develop, but I wish we had this now. And it's super tricky. Another aspect of it, we ask who are the technologists. That's another way of asking who are the legitimate stakeholders or the legitimate participants in the conversation. We always have this problem of sort of determining who's in and who's out. With COVID for a long time, I don't know how many of you were involved in this issue at all, but there was a kind of an underlying discourse about, everybody's an epidemiologist now. So there was some pushback to the recognition that it was a broad issue and needed to include more perspectives than just health perspectives. Because it made things much more complicated. We didn't have Erik's STIR process to help us figure out how to approach COVID. But we actually need something like that, now. This slide is, this is a really quick distillation of some work I've been doing for a while, trying to figure out how you deal with the intersection of climate change and energy with a social context, kind of surrounding it with policy context, where instead of thinking about every single thing that we might do related to climate change as its own little technical silo, which is how we deal with it culturally, scientifically, and policy-wise, that we realize that things we do for mitigation and energy transitions, things we do to build resilience and adaptation capacity, and things that we do that might directly intervene in the climate, either through geoengineering or through removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, are actually part of the same policy choice set. So that's not how we structure them, and it's not how we, normally fund them or think about them or even meet in workshops and conferences. But it absolutely is the way we have to be thinking about things if we're going to solve the overall problem. So this is an example of the kinds of questions you ask, the way you frame the technology issue will determine who's involved, how you have those conversations, and the kinds of solutions that come out of them. I'm going to just touch briefly on a project I've been doing for a while that's in the energy transition space, and this is the only example I'll really give of, Bob mentioned that Mahmud and I both work on questions about participatory solutions and kind of inclusive things. The SEEK project is something that came out of work I was doing with faith communities who have a strong interest in climate change and climate action, and typically very low levels of, if you want to call it, technological or scientific literacy. And so they were asking, they're asking us as a university for impartial assistance, helping them sort of figure things out. Out of it grew a couple of different projects, but the SEEK project has turned out to be in some ways, the one that has the potential to be the biggest. So what we've been doing is working with faith communities all over the country and potentially internationally to understand that in order to make a difference, they have to kind of know their starting point and then be able to figure out, how the changes that they're making can measurably reflect on the progress they've made from that baseline. Without going into details about it, the theory behind this is the most important and interesting part for PIT. So the theory behind it is that we normally think about energy transitions as largely hardware sorts of system changes. We think about them mostly as science technology changes with some markets thrown in. But if we actually look at it as a social problem and say, we're talking about some pretty wide scale change, like very, very large scale change, which is essentially societal change. What if we think about that in terms of social values and drivers, social assets and resources, social networks, things that we normally don't think about in terms of the agents for science and technology change? But if we do think about it that way, what kind of projects do we need to run? What kinds of initiatives do we need to develop? What kinds of inclusive mechanisms do we need to design and implement? And this project is based on that. So in practice, what it means is that even though to some degree we're building technological literacy in communities that don't already have it, we're also reflexively, reciprocally building other kinds of literacy into and with other people that are not used to talking with faith communities. They're not used to thinking about justice and ethical issues in the work that they normally do. And we essentially build a platform where we can have that kind of knowledge sharing from a whole bunch of different perspectives and just figure out how to make it work. But we find that the solutions that come out of that are actually quite different than the ones that we might have had otherwise. And really that's all I'm going to say, because I lost my ability to see my clock when I went full screen, and I'm pretty sure I'm over.
That was awesome and right on time, Elisa. Absolutely loving the different scales and views of the world as you see it, and also this coming together of the disciplines, as you mentioned. Also loved your comments on the risk assessment and its sort of relationship with the tech assessment, with the examples. And I can see, given you're a joint appointment, as many of our scholars are, with the School of Sustainability and also the School for the Future of Innovation, how much that's demonstrated in your presentation. But just that one slide with the gears and this life-changing view of things are a social problem, if we could just take that away, whereas we see it as here's the technology and off we go problem, that actually revolutionizes the way we approach those wicked problems that you and Bob actually study. But I'm just taken aback by your presentation and its depth and breadth. questions from the floor for Elisa. We do have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone wanted to unmute, Andy, go ahead. I think
Sure,
I saw you going for the buzzer.
I posted it in the chat, but I'm just curious. I'm currently a grad student in the Global Technology and Development Program, but Pitt has really piqued my interest. My background's in HCI, and it sort of seems to me like GTD and Pitt are quite complementary, and I was wondering if there's been any conversations internally around double degrees.
Kat, that didn't come through really clearly. Could you repeat what that question was?
Yes. So Andy was talking about the complementarity of the GTD degree and also the Pitt offering, one on global development, of course, another online course at SFIS, and ours on the public interest, of which there seems to be some wonderful linkage. Elisa, what are your off-the-cuff thoughts about a double degree in that space, where there would be a cojoinment of a GTD X period of time and then following on perhaps a Pitt or some kind of more
With Pitt?
integrated?
So I'll answer that in 2 ways. Substantively, I think that there's a lot of overlap in a useful way, and I think that that's actually true in most of our graduate programs. The orientation in GTD, even though it deals with technology, because of who runs that program, tends to focus a lot more on the politics and the policy, which I do too, you know. So I'm very familiar with that. I worked with Mary Jane and Gary a fair amount. I think that I would be, just speaking kind of like as a professional and a professor, I would be leery about a double master's degree unless I could do it very efficiently. Like I think I would be more inclined to choose the one that fit me better and then try to take advantage of the fact that you have access to the other program because it's in the same school, and see how much you can build the two together by using a combination of your core classes and electives to get as much of everything as you want.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is a wonderful response. I mean, you could think about the elective choices you now have offered to you, which could be the Pitt core programs or Pitt core courses. That's the principles of Pitt. That's co-designing the future, technology impact assessment, and also public engagement strategies. But let's hear perhaps from Mahmud now, and we can come back to you, Elisa, if you're still online,
Sure.
and Andy, perhaps some more things will unravel during the next discussion. Mahmud, over to you. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here and to follow up what Elisa suggested, that talk about my background. So I used to call myself a recovering engineer. Then I came to academia. Now I sort of try to say I'm a recovering academic. And one of the things is that I get to be at the fun spot because I work in Washington, D.C. at the ASU Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes. So I'm at the interface between academia and practice. And and because we work in this institution that prides itself on this innovation, I get to try and fail. And because of that, I get to, try things and work with both, people who are in academia, both who are in practice, to basically try to operationalize these ideas. Okay, I understand all of this, but how do I actually do it? How do I make a difference? And my work in that area falls into 2 buckets. So one set of questions asks, how can we make science and technology useful? And the other question is, how can we make science and technology decisions more democratic? And the answer to both of those 2 questions comes around the question of the public. We are talking about, this is the general order of things. Like, we started with talking about the concept, and now we are finally talking about public. So public is always at the end of the process. This is by design. It's not by failure, because when Vannevar Bush designed science and technology policy, he put research at the front and society at the end. But the whole idea is that, we're trying to do these things for society. Shouldn't we ask society first what it wants to do? So a lot of my work is basically trying to go and ask that question. Should we or should we not And if we should, then how? And this is what the course that I am delighted to actually develop based on what we have learned by doing this work, this public engagement. And it's basically, the strategies for doing that. So I'm going to share my screen to basically say, why do we even need public engagement? Let me see if I can find it. Yes. And are you able to see my screen or no? Did I? Okay. So I was going to talk about the course, but I'm going to start with talking about why do we need to engage the public. One of the things so I'm going to start with the story. So let's start with the story that I've been working on, this with autonomous vehicles. So where we were in 2017. So if 2017, what we were seeing that this was an inevitable revolution that was going to come and take over. And if you look at the statements being given by experts in the industry, was that, we're going to have this, not in 2020, in 2017. And the urban planners, policymakers, everybody says, okay, this is coming. So what do we do? So you look at what the conversation was in 2017 was that, okay, we have to design these cities now. And how do we frame? How do we sort of define what problems we're going to solve with this new technology, not the other way around? So you have these Boston consulting groups laying out all these scenarios where we have actually fast forwarded, not, there is this different levels of automation, all the way to where we don't have a driver, we don't have a steering wheel. And now let's arrange the pieces and see how we can design our urban system to reduce accidents, to free up parking spaces, to reduce emissions, all wonderful things. But, what was the public thinking about that at that time? So we went and spent a few weekends with people in rural Maryland and also urban Maryland, just to ask them, okay, what are your hopes and concerns? There's this big revolution's coming, but what you're thinking about it? And they said, geez, I'm not really sure, because I don't know if I want to give up control completely. So I get, I don't actually see a completely driverless situation. I like what it does. I want to assist it, but I'm not actually thinking all that far. So people are grappling with the issue of control and automation, how much to give, how much to retain. Then they're thinking about jobs. Okay, I'm going to lose jobs, I'm going to gain jobs, but how do I retrain myself? I mean, they're thinking about, okay, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I'm going to rescue somebody from a car. And how do I cut into these things that I don't know? So I need retraining. And then why do you take away jobs? We're a one truck stop town. We want the trucks to be safer, but don't take away our jobs. So this whole complex issue of jobs and employment, about retraining, that nobody was talking about. And then about safety, the whole thing gets sold because of, it's going to save lives because we're going to take the human out of the equation. But will I be even feel safe to get in one? What happens to my data? What happens to my, privacy? What happens to my security? So it's a very different framing of the problem. So what happens? So what happens in 2019 is we have the industry people now coming and saying, hey, don't call this self-driving, don't call this autopilot, don't call this, we don't have that yet. It's all about damage control and managing expectation. And what we're seeing now is what's being said is that, hey, we can't do this at society. We need to actually do it with society. And you have auto executives now saying that this actually the technical problem, the policy problem, we're eventually going to solve. But if we don't have the public with us, all of this is for nothing. So So that sort of sets up, what this course that I would like to share our learning with is all about. So it's about two types of failures. So one type of failure is obviously we can have market success, but we can have public value failure. So this is what Jumana started out saying, right to profit without leaving our conscience at the door. So can we do both? Can we have market success and also public value success? And can we also take care of those missed opportunities where we have technology looking for society? Okay, we have this thing, what do we do with it? And then public asking for something and nobody is building. So these two type of things we can address by engaging with the public. But it's not the same thing, because what Elisa was talking about, what Bob was talking about, what Erik was talking about, are all different types of technology at different stages of development. Some are emerging. So we need to decide, okay, should we or should we not do this? Some are there, but we need to figure out how. So public engagement is not one size fits all. It's different in different contexts. It's different whether you're in industry, whether you're in government, whether you're in academia. So how do we kind of organize this in a kind of systematic way so we can actually, help technologists, planners, decision makers, engage the public in a way that helps them make better decisions about what they're doing. So the course that I've thought about is laid out in 8 sequence and basically tries to get at that in a systematic way. So the first way is what's the rationale? Why do we want to do this? Why do you want to bring in the public? Why do you want to flip the model of innovation? Why and how do we, what happens if we don't do it? So we the first part is to lay out the argument for that. And then we talk about, okay, there's a lot of definitional thing. I say public engagement, somebody says science communication, somebody says, public understanding of science. How does all of those things fit in? What are the boundaries? What is the vocabulary? What is the language? What's the typology? So once we get that out of the way, then we talk about, okay, now let's think about how we're going to design this. How do we can do informed, inclusive, integrated public engagement? So Erik was talking about how do you articulate, the whole, what the public value is, what the public need is, and that means like a two-way engagement. So how we can include those voices, from those indigenous voices, those people with disabilities, people who are marginalized, people who are systematically left out of the conversation in all of this process. So it's different set of questions depending on where you are in the technology spectrum. So if you're in upstream, let's say something about gene editing or geoengineering, it doesn't exist. It's all hypothetical. Should we or should we not do? It's a different set of questions. So you need to actually a lot more education before the public can actually engage with you. And you need to actually talk about scenarios, because it's not an A and B choices yet, right? So then we have the midstream stuff. This automated vehicle. Yeah, we have the technology. We figured out LiDAR. We have figured out all of these things, but how do we blend it? How does facial recognition software work? How does, we make it actually do the things that we would like to do and also protect us from the harm that it can happen? So this whole thing with the COVID and the pandemic response is one of those midstream. It's not breakthrough technologies. We have to make decisions as we are innovating. And then there are some things where, okay, the technology is pretty much settled, meaning like we are talking about establishing boundaries, 21st century policing, surveillance technologies, right? Okay, that's a different set of questions. So the public engagement in all of these cases are very, very different, and it needs to be strategic and it needs to be integrated with the decision-making environment we're working in. And finally, there's another element that's also very, in vogue now, is the whole idea of innovating with the public. So in the science side, it looks like citizen science. In the technology, it's the maker movement. So it's now you have non-traditional, non-expert who haven't really trained in those things actually participating and innovating. So how do we do all of these together? And finally, the last piece is, okay, the integration. So how can we come up with a strategy so we can actually not just talk about these things, but do it in a way we avoid those failures that I talked about, the missed opportunity failure and also the public value failure. So that's where I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahmud. Amazing passion. And we know you've actually done the groundwork. I've seen firsthand your deliveries, both in the DC office and also in Tempe, Arizona, when you've gone around and actually brought society to a place of deliberation, and how much you listen and how much people feel fulfilled that they've been heard. But these are firsthand experiences, not from textbooks, and that's what makes your work so vibrant. I also think there's a great intersection with this philosophy of public engagement with the research group I lead, Society Policy Engineering Collective. It was, to begin with, the Engineering Policy and Society Collective, and within 1 year, the research team said, Katina, this is ridiculous. We don't believe engineering comes first, society comes first. And again, it's an echo of everybody's thoughts here, right from Dave to Jumana, to Erik and so forth, going right through. I'm just hearing even Bob, it's a social problem, and you, Mahmud, it's society. I'm just going to check my chat window. Anyone, let's go live with this one. Anyone got any questions for Mahmud in the closing sort of stages before we hear the last talk? Free up your mic and directly interact with us, please. Okay, Pooja Chitre said, do we identify technocracy as a challenge for PIT, Mahmud?
Oh, that's a big question, right? So one of the things we are actually looking at is changing in the culture of expertise. And we feel what we have learned, because we've been at it for the last 10 years and working on a variety problem, something happens when we actually bring in the expert, the stakeholders and public together, because we change the boundary of engagement. And there is something happens that is a new value proposition emerges, but it doesn't happen theoretically. It doesn't happen if I go and give you a presentation or a book. It happens when you're actually doing it. And then you gain insight, because there's all these preconceived barriers that we have, and which is the main one is that this deficit model, that people don't know, we're the experts, and for them to, if they know what we know, they will agree with us. So that's the whole deficit model of communication. But the first barrier is that, no, they have a different idea that you haven't perhaps considered. And once we're able to demonstrate that, then says, oh, okay, I see value in this. Let's do more of this. So this is what happens when you work with NASA. We were engaging, they asked, NASA wanted to know, okay, we have this mission. What do public care about? Do they care about more science? Do they care about more technology? Or do they care about more economic gains? This was about asteroids, and public didn't care about any of those three any more than they cared about. We don't have an agency dedicated for planetary defense. They said, if an asteroid was to come, there's no who is in charge. And then NASA takes that and then establishes the Office of Planetary Defense. So this was not even the expert realm. So yes, technocracy is a problem, the way we problematize things. Public has a different perspective, and sometimes they can help us, with our blind spots. So yes, I think that was the question. I don't know whether I addressed it or not.
Katina, you're on mute.
Thank you, Elisa. I was going to say to Pooja, did you want to respond to that? Did that answer your question? You can do so in the chat window or unmute.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you. Nice to meet you and hear your voice.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you too. So it was a very, very informative webinar. So thank you. And thank you, Mahmud, for answering my question. as in we do need to, I understand that technocracy is a very challenging issue to talk about and also address. Like I am from India, and just to give you a small example, so the Indian government is trying to, is it okay if I give an example? Like,
Oh,
do we
please,
have that
please.
time? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So the Indian government currently is trying to modify the environmental impact assessment policy for 2020. And if you go through the policy, you realize they have actually completely wiped out the section on public engagement. And when people actually try to bring that out, the government um, actually banned websites. They actually fabricated charges using laws which were for unlawful activities and jailed people for doing that. So I don't know, how do we exactly then, talk about public engagement then when public do want to engage, but then there is another um, party which doesn't want to talk. So it's tricky.
Mahmud.
Yeah, so we have learned that all the stars have to align. So there's the technological opportunity, but there's also the political window. So, for us, this type of public engagement work up to 2016, we were able to work with federal agencies. Now that window closed. So most of our current work is philanthropy funded, but it doesn't mean that we give up. We just find where those openings are. So yes, I mean, we're at a position of advantage being in academia and being in this interface. And I understand it's much harder, but it's you have to be long, it has to be a long game to change something that has, institutionalized and the culture. So it's little by little, and one little break gives you lead to another one. And that's how we have been sort of building this kind of work.
Jumana, I know you have some experience with this sort of general area of question. And Pooja, first thing I want to say is how brave the question was, but also how much the internationalization of this degree will be so paramount to the outcomes. The understanding of PIT within America's context versus Australia versus India versus Hong Kong versus Africa will be very different. And we are relying on this sharing between students to maximize the learning. Not all the same economic systems, not all the same political processes, not all the same kinds of cognizance of social welfare, the rights of the indigenous, the rights of the disabled, the rights of single parents, and the rights of those with autism, and so and the rights of refugees, for example. But I know Pivot for Humanity, as Jumana told us in the chat window, was established for the next generation. I want to give her an opportunity to respond to Pooja's dilemma there. If we unmute you, yes, thanks.
Thank you, yes. It is a very brave question. And I agree with Mahmud's assessment completely. I mean, it's not a way to not answer the question, but it is a long game, and it is one step at a time, and it is cumulative. I think that the challenge, if we it's technocracy versus autocracy versus democracy versus, there's always a push against something. And I think that's why, from the perspective of Pivot for Humanity, the idea of instilling a set of values at the individual level that is then shared across, that binds people together, is beneficial, so that you have a system that works within, in America in particular, a highly capitalistic environment. So whatever the current order is, whatever the Uber framework is, a profession can protect its practitioners and the people. because it serves as an umbrella, right, as a form of defense between or protection from the slippery slope. I think everyone is tempted all the time to, we are constantly being pushed and prodded to do more, be more, and the intentions of the people prodding and pushing us aren't always noble. And unless we have our defenses, unless we are equipped, unless we are trained, unless we have a toolkit and an ability to push back, I don't think we get anywhere. So is it a challenge? Yes. Is there a way to minimize the downside? Also, yes. It just is going to take time.
Thanks, Jumana. Mahmud,
Katina, can I just mention one thing?
Yes, please. Pooja, go ahead.
To pick up on that, this notion
Elisa.
of a long game and that context matters is really critical. And I just want to take that back a little bit to underlying political ethics. So technocracy and democracy aren't necessarily opposed to each other. One can exist within the other. Autocracy and democracy can't exist together, right? So one is about the fundamental governmental system and philosophy of social ethics. And then the other is kind of how technology, if you want to, how decision-making in an administrative sense fits into that. And I think that one of the things that's really important that kind of runs through the comments that Katina and everybody else made here is that part of the recognition about whether or not public participation is invited and whether there are mechanisms for supporting it has something to do, first of all, with the governmental system itself. And second of all, has to do with, because some actually believe that public participation is an important thing and others do not. The second is the policy domain, the specific issue that people are concerned with. So one of the things that I've been really intrigued in when I moved from working on more straight up environmental issues to energy issues is that because environmental issues are grounded in a raft of public legislation that not just endorses but requires public participation, even if it's not done well, it's required. Energy laws do not. Energy is governed by laws that generally did not do that. And so you find a kind of a clashing of culture, both philosophical and process. So sometimes the long game is because you're taking assumptions that were baked in one issue domain, bring into another issue domain that doesn't have them. So that's one thing. There could be the underlying governmental hostility to public participation. But this piece, this really interesting piece that Jumana brought up and that Pooja referred to and that Katina emphasized about thinking about sort of technology itself as a space that can develop its own culture is really pretty interesting, right? I mean, that's a little bit, that's very innovative, and it's asking a lot of a sector that may or may not have its own internal social cohesion to build a culture that becomes kind of an epistemic community. So regardless of where it is, that it kind of adheres to a particular code, by which I don't mean the kind that you write, but the kind that you live by. And I think that shouldn't be overlooked as these are pretty deep things. And I mean, they really are. I'm not sure that we should take them for granted. So if Pitt assumes that that's what we're developing as community, that's a pretty big deal. Just saying.
We all agree. And we love how you phrased it, Elisa. Mahmud?
Yeah, it's actually, so we have an NSF funded study to study 3 agencies we work with: DOE, Energy, NASA, and NOAA. And the organization cultures could not be any different. DOE, we did with, the project was with dealing with nuclear waste. They have this thing called DAD strategy, decide and defend. That's how DOE, with their whole regulatory nuclear past, that's how they have always done things. So for them to do public engagement is really, really challenging. Whereas NASA, which had to sell the Apollo program during the war on poverty and all these other things, so they were always good at public engagement and trying to, so it's very interesting. So the culture within these institutions is very, very different. So I totally agree. And if we can create something new that's more reflexive, more integrated, or the stuff that Erik talks about, you know, it'll be a wonderful thing to accomplish.
Mahmud, thank you for those remarks. I wanted to ask you one last question, and that is, how complex is it to actually deliberate with the full representation of individuals in society, and how does one go about that? I know you'll be sharing that in your course, but you amaze me that somehow your strategy is actually attract even the homeless to come to be heard. Can you talk to me and the team about how generally, why that's important to you, and how do you do that generally?
Well, recruitment is very hard, but that's why it costs so much to do these things right. So, but you know, we bring up this situation with homeless. You know, even if I have $100 stipend to give, where do I send it? How do I give them the Metro card? How do I give them the information to come to? So logistically, this becomes a lot of work, and so but it's something, you know, one of the things, how do you make the invisible visible? So that's the challenge. And the more we do it, more we talk and write and present it in its entirety, what it takes to actually engage the public, not the tick box exercise we do with all the public commenting period or town hall or anything. What does real engagement mean? And do the substantive as opposed to instrumental. You know, it requires care, thought, and time, and that's the only way. There's no alternative.
I like that notion of care. It's something I've put in the welcome letter to the admitted students that we have this session. Care is a big part of SFIS, I think, and our general philosophy across our master's and PhD programs, and even undergraduate. But thank you to all our faculty speakers. I have a last special guest, and that's our wonderful professional staffer, Wendi Taylor, who's helping us with all our admissions. Wendi, hello.
Oops, let me unmute there. Hi, everyone. Can you see me okay?
Yes, we can, and
Awesome.
We can hear you too.
Perfect. Cindy's going to help me out with my paper that I have going, but I did want to just go over the requirements for admissions for the program. I wanted to go over the program requirements themselves and some general information about the PIT program. And I'm happy to answer any questions students have. So I do apologize for those that have inquired about the program. You may have already heard from me, so some of this might be redundant, but for those that are new, hopefully this information proves helpful. So I want to go over real quick. So regards to the application process, or what we're looking for in regards to your application, you are going to be required to submit an application online, and the fee, the fee depends on, for online, I believe it does still depend on your residency, whether you're an Arizona resident or international. Official transcripts, proof of English proficiency. If the language of the country you're coming from is not English, you will have to show English proficiency. A professional resume or CV. A personal statement that addresses why you are interested in the PIT program and what you can bring to it, and 3 letters of recommendation. So that's what we're looking for in your admissions process. That said, I want to intervene here a little bit and just let you know that for admissions, we do admit for fall session A, which typically starts in mid to late August, and spring session A, which is in early January. So those are our 2 admission cycles. However, if you are interested in taking classes and don't feel like you have time to get admitted before taking them, just reach out to me because there are some other options available to you. Okay, next I wanted to discuss what is actually in the PIT program. So there's going to be 12 credit hours of core coursework. As you can see here, there's PIT 501, 502, 503, and 504. For the fall term, PIT 501 is offered in fall session A, which starts on August 20th. And PIT 503, the technology impact assessment, will be offered in session B, which starts in mid-October. And for spring, we are looking at 502, co-designing the future for session A, and 504, public engagement strategies for session B. In addition to those 12 core courses, you are going to take 15 credits of electives. After admission into the program, I will send you a list, a fall class, or a list of the classes available for that specific semester, and you are able to choose electives from that list, that pre-approved list. However, if there's other classes that you're interested in that aren't listed, you are always welcome to contact Dr. Michael for approval. I'm sure she's very flexible as long as she can see how it relates to the program and your interests. And on that note, because we will have students, PIT students with different degrees and fields, different backgrounds. There are going to be classes listed on the fall class or the class list that is sent out that you may or may not qualify to take. So if you're interested in taking classes in the Master's in Computing program and you don't have a computing background, say you have a background in psychology or something along those lines, you don't have the prerequisites, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to take those courses. However, there is quite an extensive list of different options for you. I just wanted to make it clear that some of the elective classes do have prerequisites that you would need to meet in order to take those. Let me see here. Okay, so if you would have 15 credits of those electives, and then your final class is going to be PIT 593, which is an applied project. That is a research project, which you will work with Dr. Michael closely on, that's going to be applicable to your area of interest. We are in the process of creating a resource page for our PIT students. And on that page, we are going to put some applicable, or just some ideas of different subjects and topics you can research. And then we also hope to have a few exemplar papers up there so you can see what we're looking for in regards to your applied project. So you have some basis of knowledge going into that. A few other things, let me see here. International students are welcome to apply. That is absolutely welcome, and we encourage that. The way the structure of the program is the classes are going to run in the accelerated 7.5-week format. So as true with all other ASU online courses, they're going to be offered in session A and B, which again is the first 7.5 weeks of the semester and then the second. And students can go attend this program both part-time or full-time. Along the same lines, I'm the advisor for the Global Technology and Development program, which has both campus-based and online program, but we have more online students. And I would say the majority of those students, because they have family and work obligations, typically take one class each session for session A and session B for a total of 6 credits a semester. However, and I'm sure this will be the case with PIT too, every student is different. We do have some that go full-time, so that is absolutely an option as well, but I just wanted to let you know there is some flexibility with that. And then just a quick note on how the application process works. After you submit your application and submit your application with the payment, it will be then sent to our academic unit for review. Once I'm the one that actually looks, and once I confirm that all the application materials have been received, it is then forwarded to the academic unit for review. And I notify the committee members that a student is ready to be reviewed. Once that admissions decision has been made, I enter in that decision into the system, and then ASU, the grad college, makes the final decision. So that's how the application process works as a whole. That said, are there any questions I can answer?
I might have a question, anticipating some of them to come.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Wendi, and thank you for that wonderful overview.
Sure.
You are every bit as integral to this program as our students and our faculty delivering. I hope you know that deeply.
Thank you.
The question I have is, do you need to come in with any technical background into PIT.
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot to address that. So no, you don't. You can come in with any background, which is great because it just gives a wonderful breadth to the program, having students from diverse backgrounds. The only issue, like I had mentioned before, was that if you come in with a non-technical degree, engineering or computer science, and you wanted to take classes in the electives list of that nature, you may not meet the prerequisites for that. But beyond that, there are no requirements for specific background to get into the PIT program.
Thank you, Wendi, for everything you're doing behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. I know we've got some wonderful students already enrolled, some of who are on this call.
Yes.
We have a national director of a unit on violence. We have a blockchain expert in the education field. We have a user experience designer from a university who leads a team. We've got an amazing group of students who are coming to us, and there may be an archivist soon, if I could say that, and somebody also working in the non-commercial big tech space on privacy, so non-commercial. So we've got people from NGOs, from government, from not-for-profits, from industry joining us, and we could not be more excited. Spread the word around if you're interested. Contact us. We're always willing to help.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to say, as a thank you, on the call are also our marketing specialists and events managers, Cindy Dick, Eliza Robinson, Melissa Waite, who always take care of us. On the call as well are all of you. I'm going to run through the list of those of you who are remaining because some of you haven't spoken. Again, Andy, thanks for those many questions. Chelsea Slay, hello. Elisa, thank you. And Erik Fisher, thank you. Jumana, what can we say? Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Mahmud, thank you. Melissa Smallwood, thank you for your comment. Pooja, for your wonderful comment. Bob and Toby, who's online on the telephone. May we say have a wonderful, wonderful rest of day, and may we keep pivoting. Is that the phrase? Thanks everyone for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.